April 9, 1865, Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia. The spring rain has stopped, but water still drips from the locust trees surrounding Wilmer McLean's brick farmhouse. Ulysses S. Grant is not standing at attention. He is sitting in a cane-backed chair, mud caked on his boots up to the knees, his uniform rumpled and stained from 3 days of hard riding. The air smells of wet wool and horse sweat, and the faint sulfur residue that clings to everything after 4 years of war. Robert E. Lee sits across from him in full dress uniform, sword at his side, every button polished despite the fact that his army is starving and surrounded. The room is silent, except for the ticking of a Seth Thomas clock on the mantel. Grant's head throbs with one of his migraines, the kind that feels like an artillery shell exploding behind his eyes. He has not slept in 72 hours. Lee's face is a mask carved from stone, but his hands rest on his knees, and Grant can see the tremor in the left one, the slight shake that comes from a heart condition Lee has hidden from his men for 3 years. Outside, 50,000 Confederate soldiers wait to learn if they will be hanged as traitors or slaughtered as their armies dissolve. 100,000 Union soldiers wait to learn if they will finally go home. Grant chews the inside of his cheek. This is the moment. Lee has come to ask for terms, to ask for mercy, and Grant's response will either heal a broken nation or ensure it bleeds for another generation. To understand why this room contains the entire future of America, you must go back 8 months, to the hell that was the Overland Campaign, to Cold Harbor, to the Wilderness, to Spotsylvania, to the 65,000 Union casualties Grant accumulated in 6 weeks of fighting that made his name synonymous with butchery in every northern newspaper. To the moment when Ulysses S. Grant became the most hated man in the United States. June 3, 1864, Cold Harbor, Virginia. 7,000 Union soldiers dead or wounded in 8 minutes. Grant had ordered a frontal assault against entrenched Confederate positions, and the attack shattered like glass against Lee's earthworks. Men pinned notes to their uniforms before the assault with their names and home addresses so their bodies could be identified. They knew. They all knew. The rebel earthworks ran in a 7-mile curve, zigzagging to create overlapping fields of fire, logs and dirt, and sharpened stakes, creating a fortification that turned rifled musket fire and canister shot into a mechanical killing system. When the Union troops emerged from the tree line at dawn, the Confederate fire came in sheets, not volleys, sheets. A continuous roar like tearing canvas amplified 1,000 times. The .58 caliber Minié balls shredded through oak trees 2 feet thick. Men simply came apart. The survivors tried to dig in with their hands and tin cups, clawing at Virginia red clay, while rebel sharpshooters picked them off one by one throughout the day. By noon, the moaning of the wounded between the lines created a sound like wind through a broken cathedral. Grant sat in his tent that afternoon with his head in his hands and wept. He would later write in his memoirs that he regretted Cold Harbor more than any other order he ever gave. Northern newspapers screamed for his removal. Butcher Grant, they called him. Grant the drunkard. The Illinois tanner who trades lives for yards. Lincoln received delegations demanding Grant's dismissal. Some wanted him court-martialed. Others wanted worse. But Lincoln understood something the newspapers did not. Grant was the first Union general who would not retreat. McClellan had retreated from Richmond in 1862 after the 7 days. Burnside had retreated after Fredericksburg. Hooker had retreated after Chancellorsville. Meade had let Lee escape after Gettysburg. Every previous Union commander in Virginia had fought Lee, suffered casualties, and then pulled back to lick their wounds, giving the Confederacy time to recover, to recruit, to rebuild. Grant did something different. After the Wilderness, where 18,000 Union soldiers fell in 2 days of fighting in burning woods where wounded men roasted alive, Grant did not retreat. He moved south. After Spotsylvania, where another 18,000 fell in 2 weeks of the most savage fighting the war had seen, Grant did not retreat. He moved south. After Cold Harbor, after that morning of mechanical slaughter, Grant did not retreat. He crossed the James River and moved on Petersburg. "I propose to fight it out on this line if it takes all summer," Grant had written to Washington, and he meant it. This was the secret, not brilliant tactics, not inspired maneuver, relentless pressure, never stopping, never giving Lee time to breathe or shift forces or recruit replacements. Grant had discovered that the Confederacy was not an army to be outmaneuvered, but a resource base to be destroyed, and every battle, even the ones he lost, brought Confederate collapse closer. Lee understood this by July. Sitting in his headquarters tent outside Petersburg as Grant's forces settled into siege lines that would strangle Richmond's supply lines, Lee wrote to Jefferson Davis with uncharacteristic bleakness. "We must destroy this army of Grant's before he gets to the James River. If he gets there, it will become a siege, and then it will be a mere question of time." Lee was right. Petersburg became a siege. The Confederacy had 9 months left. But those 9 months were 9 months of hell for the soldiers in the trenches. Both sides dug elaborate fortifications, miles of earthworks and bomb-proofs, and covered ways and artillery positions. The siege of Petersburg became a preview of World War I, 50 years early. Sharpshooters on both sides killed anyone who showed their head. Artillery bombardments came at random hours, shells screaming down to explode in geysers of mud and wood splinters and human remains. The Union forces, with their access to northern industry and railroads, ate beef and potatoes and drank coffee. The Confederate soldiers ate parched corn and whatever they could forage from a Virginia countryside, picked clean by 4 years of war. Scurvy appeared in Confederate ranks. Dysentery. Desertion rates climbed to 50 men per day by winter. Lee's army was melting away. Grant knew this. He sat in his headquarters at City Point and received telegraph dispatches from Sherman, who was burning his way through Georgia toward Savannah. He received reports from Sheridan, who was systematically destroying the Shenandoah Valley, burning barns and mills and crops so thoroughly that Sheridan boasted a crow flying over the valley would need to carry its own rations. He received reports from the Federal blockade, which had sealed every southern port so tight that Confederate soldiers were fighting in rags and barefoot, their weapons held together with wire and hope. Grant did not need to destroy Lee's army in battle. He just needed to wait and keep the pressure on and let the Confederacy collapse from resource exhaustion. Lincoln needed Grant to wait for one more reason: the 1864 presidential election. Through the summer of 1864, Lincoln was certain he would lose. The war had dragged on for 3 years. Casualties had reached numbers that paralyzed the Northern imagination. 620,000 dead by war's end, nearly 2% of the entire American population. The Democratic Party had nominated George McClellan on a peace platform that would have allowed the Confederacy to secede. If McClellan won, slavery would continue. The Union would be permanently split. Everything would be for nothing. Lincoln wrote a memo in August predicting his own defeat and sealed it, asking his cabinet to sign the back without reading it. This morning, as for some days past, it seems exceedingly probable that this administration will not be re-elected. Then Sherman took Atlanta. On September 2nd, 1864, Sherman's telegram arrived. "Atlanta is ours, and fairly won." The news electrified the North. Suddenly, victory seemed possible. Lincoln won re-election in November with 55% of the popular vote, carrying every state except New Jersey, Delaware, and Kentucky. The Confederacy's last hope died that night. If they could not win at the ballot box, they could not win at all. Lee knew this too. Through the winter of 1864-1865, he watched his army dissolve. Desertion became hemorrhage. Men slipped away at night, heading home to North Carolina or Georgia or Tennessee, tired of starving, tired of fighting for a cause that was clearly lost. Lee wrote increasingly desperate letters to Davis, requesting reinforcements that did not exist, requesting supplies that could not be found, requesting a miracle that would not come. On March 25th, Lee attempted a breakout attack on Fort Stedman, hoping to crack Grant's siege lines and force a withdrawal. The attack failed. Lee lost 4,000 men he could not replace. Grant barely noticed. April 1st, 1865, Five Forks, Virginia. Phil Sheridan's cavalry and the 5th Corps under Gouverneur Warren smashed into Lee's right flank, crushing George Pickett's division and capturing 5,000 prisoners. The South Side Railroad, Lee's last supply line into Petersburg, was cut. That night, Lee sent word to Jefferson Davis in Richmond, "Evacuate the capital. We cannot hold." On April 2nd, Grant ordered a general assault all along the siege lines. The Confederate defenses, undermanned and undersupplied, crumbled. A.P. Hill, one of Lee's most trusted Corps commanders, was shot dead while riding to rally his men. Lee watched from a hilltop as his army retreated in disorder. "It is all my fault," he said to no one in particular. Petersburg fell. Richmond fell. The Confederate government fled south by train. Mobs looted the city. Fires set by retreating Confederate forces consumed entire neighborhoods. The Tredegar Iron Works, which had produced most of the Confederacy's artillery, stood silent and empty. Lee's only hope was to move west, link up with Joseph Johnston's army in North Carolina, and continue fighting. But he needed food. His men had not eaten in 3 days. They marched through the night, starving soldiers falling by the roadside, too weak to continue. Lee sent dispatch riders to Amelia Courthouse, where he had ordered rations to be waiting. When the army arrived on April 4th, they found no food. Someone had blundered. The supplies had never arrived. Lee lost 24 hours foraging in the surrounding countryside, 24 hours that allowed Grant's forces to get ahead of him, to cut off his line of retreat. Grant did not give him another mistake. The Union cavalry under Sheridan moved faster, riding ahead to block every road, every river crossing, every possible escape route. Lee's army, desperate and starving, stumbled westward. On April 6th at Sailor's Creek, Federal forces cut off and captured a quarter of Lee's remaining army, 8,000 men, 6 generals, most of Lee's wagon train. Lee watched from a hillside as his army came apart. "My God, has the army dissolved?" he asked. Not yet, but close. By April 8th, Lee had fewer than 30,000 men left, surrounded by 100,000 Union troops. He tried one more breakout attempt on the morning of April 9th, a pre-dawn assault that briefly pushed back the Union cavalry. Then the infantry appeared, blue ranks stretching from horizon to horizon, flags flying, artillery wheeling into position. Lee sat on his horse Traveler and watched them come. He had no ammunition left for a sustained battle. His men had not eaten in 4 days. His escape routes were all cut off. James Longstreet, his senior corps commander, rode up beside him. Lee turned to Longstreet with tears in his eyes. "There is nothing left for me to do but go and see General Grant," Lee said, "and I would rather die 1,000 deaths." The lost cause. Mythology will tell you that Lee surrendered to overwhelming Union numbers, that he was never outgeneraled, only outmanned and outresourced. This is the lie that white Southerners told themselves for 100 years, the myth that built monuments to Lee and Jackson, that taught children that the Civil War was about states' rights rather than slavery, that pretended the Confederacy died nobly rather than drowning in its own evil. The truth is more complex and more damning. Lee was a brilliant tactical commander who won impossible victories at Chancellorsville and Second Manassas. But he misunderstood the war he was fighting. He believed in Napoleonic decisive battles, in the idea that one perfect victory could break Northern will and win Confederate independence. He invaded the North twice, at Antietam and Gettysburg, gambling everything on that decisive victory. He lost both times. And every attack, every invasion, every aggressive campaign bled his army of men the Confederacy could not replace. Grant understood what Lee did not. This was a war of resources, not maneuver. The North had 3 times the population, 10 times the industrial capacity, complete naval supremacy, and control of every major railroad. The only way the Confederacy could win was to make the North give up, to drag the war out until Northern voters decided it was not worth the cost. And the only way to do that was to stay on the defensive, to make every Union advance cost so much blood that Northern morale collapsed. Lee did the opposite. He attacked, again and again, and every attack, even the victories, brought Confederate defeat closer. Lee rode to the McLean House under a white flag, accompanied by a single aide, Colonel Charles Marshall. Grant arrived minutes later, riding up on his horse Cincinnati, accompanied by his staff. Grant had been suffering from one of his migraines all morning, the kind that made light feel like knives in his eyes. But when he received Lee's message requesting a meeting to discuss surrender terms, the migraine vanished. "The pain left me the instant I saw the contents of Lee's letter," Grant wrote later. He rode to the McLean House in his field uniform, the one he had been wearing for 3 days, mud-splattered and plain, without even a sword. Lee wore his best dress uniform, the one with the gold sash and the jeweled sword gifted to him by admirers, every button polished to a mirror shine. The contrast was deliberate. Lee understood the meaning of symbols, of appearances. He would surrender with dignity, as a gentleman and a soldier, not as a traitor or a criminal. They met in Wilmer McLean's parlor, a simple room with horsehair chairs and a few pieces of furniture. They had known each other before the war, had served together in Mexico. They made small talk for several minutes, discussing old campaigns, mutual acquaintances, anything but the present. Lee finally brought the conversation to the point. "I suppose, General Grant, that the object of our present meeting is fully understood," Lee said. "I asked to see you to ascertain upon what terms you would receive the surrender of my army." Grant's response shocked every person in the room. He did not demand unconditional surrender. He did not insist on trials for treason. He did not require the Confederate officers to be imprisoned, or the soldiers to be executed, or even to be paraded through the streets in humiliation. Instead, Grant spoke quietly, almost gently. The Confederate soldiers would surrender their weapons and artillery. They would sign paroles promising not to take up arms against the United States, and then they would go home. That was it. Officers could keep their sidearms. Men who owned horses could keep them. They would need them for spring plowing. No prison camps, no treason trials, no executions, no reprisals, just go home. Lee's eyes widened. He had expected harsh terms. He had expected punishment. The Confederacy had killed 360,000 Union soldiers. They had fought to preserve slavery, to create a nation where 4 million human beings would remain property forever. Lee himself had owned slaves, had ordered slaves to be whipped when they tried to escape, had broken up slave families by selling children away from parents. The Confederate cause was not noble. It was built on evil, and everyone in that room knew it. Lee had every reason to expect the North to demand vengeance. But Grant was thinking about the future, not the past. He was thinking about Lincoln's second inaugural address, delivered just 5 weeks earlier. With malice toward none, with charity for all. He was thinking about what came next, about how the country would heal, about whether the war would end here or continue as a guerrilla insurgency that would bleed both sides for a generation. If Grant imposed harsh terms, if he demanded humiliation and punishment, Lee's army would not surrender. They would scatter into the mountains of Virginia and North Carolina and Tennessee, and they would fight on. Tens of thousands of armed, trained, desperate men with nothing left to lose. The war would become a nightmare of ambushes and reprisals and atrocities. It would destroy any possibility of reconciliation. It would turn Reconstruction into a permanent occupation. Grant understood that the way the war ended mattered as much as who won it. So Grant offered mercy, not because the Confederacy deserved it, but because the country needed it. Lee read the terms twice, his hands shaking slightly. "This will have a very happy effect upon my army," he said quietly. Grant did more. He noticed Lee's discomfort, the way Lee mentioned that his men had been without food for several days. Grant immediately ordered 25,000 rations to be sent to the Confederate army, food for the enemy, before the surrender was even finalized. Lee's composure finally cracked. Tears filled his eyes. He stood, shook Grant's hand, and left the McLean house to inform his army. The myth says Lee surrendered with dignity and Grant accepted with magnanimity, and in this, the myth is mostly true. But the myth leaves out the why. Grant's mercy was not weakness. It was strategic brilliance. Within days of Appomattox, Joseph Johnston surrendered to Sherman in North Carolina on similar terms. Richard Taylor surrendered in Alabama. Kirby Smith surrendered in Texas. The Confederacy collapsed, not with a whimper of continued resistance, but with a series of surrenders modeled on Appomattox. Grant's mercy killed the war. If he had demanded hangings in prison camps, the war would have continued. Southern soldiers would have scattered to continue the fight as partisans. Instead, they went home. They planted crops, they rebuilt farms. The transition from war to peace, from rebellion to reunion, happened in weeks instead of years. And it happened because Grant offered mercy at the moment of victory. But the mercy came with a cost. Grant insisted that slavery was dead, that no Confederate soldier could return to claim ownership of human beings. The 13th Amendment, abolishing slavery, was ratified 8 months later. Freedom for 4 million people was non-negotiable. On this point, Grant was iron, mercy for soldiers, death for slavery, and on this point, Lee accepted without argument. The institution he had fought to preserve was gone. He signed the surrender documents. Outside, when Confederate soldiers heard the news, many wept. Some smashed their rifles against trees rather than surrender them. Others simply sat in silence, too exhausted for emotion. The Union soldiers began to cheer and fire salutes, but Grant immediately ordered them to stop. "The war is over," he said. "The rebels are our countrymen again." That sentence contains the entire meaning of Appomattox. Our countrymen again. Not traitors, not enemies, countrymen. The following days were a strange mix of relief and sorrow. Confederate soldiers lined up to receive Union rations, their first full meal in weeks. They stacked their weapons and furled their battle flags for the last time. Many cried. Some Union soldiers shared their rations and tobacco with their former enemies, men who had been trying to kill each other days before, now sitting together and talking about home. Grant refused to meet with Lee again. He did not want to humiliate him further. He did not attend the formal surrender ceremony on April 12th, when Joshua Chamberlain, the hero of Little Round Top at Gettysburg, ordered his Union troops to salute the Confederate units as they marched past to lay down their arms. Chamberlain understood what Grant understood: honor the soldiers even as you destroy the cause they fought for. The lost cause mythology poisoned this understanding for 100 years. It turned Lee into a marble saint, a tragic hero who fought for Virginia and honor rather than slavery. It turned Confederate soldiers into noble warriors defending their homeland rather than armed insurrectionists fighting to keep human beings in chains. It built monuments to traitors in front of courthouses. It taught children that the Civil War was the war of Northern aggression. It pretended slavery was incidental, that the war was really about tariffs or states' rights or constitutional interpretation. This is the big lie, and it has rotted American race relations for generations. Lee was not a saint. He was a brilliant general who fought for an evil cause. Confederate soldiers were not heroes. They were men, some brave, some cowardly, most just trying to survive, but they fought to preserve slavery, and that stain does not wash away. Grant's mercy at Appomattox was not an endorsement of the Confederate cause. It was a pragmatic calculation to end the killing and begin healing. The truth Grant understood, the truth that room in the McLean house represented, is that you can show mercy to individuals while still condemning the evil they fought for. You can honor soldiers' courage while still insisting their cause was wicked. You can forgive without forgetting. You can reconcile without pretending the war was anything other than what it was. A fight over whether human beings could be property. A fight the Confederacy lost completely and deservedly. Grant's shocking response when Lee asked for mercy was to give it freely while making crystal clear what that mercy included and what it did not. Mercy for men, no mercy for slavery. Reconciliation for the nation, no reconciliation for the evil that caused the war. The consequences rippled forward through history. Reconstruction failed in part because of Grant's mercy, because allowing Confederate officers to keep their honor and return home also allowed them to rebuild white supremacy through legal and extra-legal terror. The Ku Klux Klan was founded by Confederate veterans. Jim Crow was built by former Confederate officers. The lost cause myth was propagated by the children of slaveholders. Grant's mercy may have ended the war quickly, but it also allowed the poison of white supremacy to survive in different forms. This is the tragedy. Mercy was necessary. Mercy was also insufficient. What was needed was mercy combined with justice, with land redistribution, with full civil rights enforced by federal troops for a generation. Instead, the North grew tired of Reconstruction. Federal troops withdrew. The Confederacy lost the war but won the peace, and Black Americans paid the price for another century. But in that room in April 1865, none of this was yet clear. In that room was only the immediate question: how does this war end? And Grant's answer was, with mercy that allows healing, with firmness that ensures slavery dies, with terms that turn enemies back into countrymen. It was imperfect, it was insufficient, but it was better than the alternative of continued slaughter. Lee left the McLean house and rode back to his army. He drafted his final order to the Army of Northern Virginia. After 4 years of arduous service marked by unsurpassed courage and fortitude, the Army of Northern Virginia has been compelled to yield to overwhelming numbers and resources. There it is. the lost cause in embryo. Not "we fought for slavery and lost," but "we were overwhelmed by numbers." Lee could not even in defeat admit the evil he had served. Grant left the McLean house and returned to his headquarters. He sent a telegram to Washington. "General Lee surrendered the Army of Northern Virginia this afternoon upon terms proposed by myself." Simple, factual, no triumph, no gloating. The war was almost over. Lincoln would be assassinated 5 days later, shot by a Confederate sympathizer who refused to accept that the South had lost. Andrew Johnson would bungle Reconstruction. The brief hope of a just peace would die, but none of that diminishes what happened in the McLean house. In that room, at that moment, Grant chose mercy over vengeance. He chose healing over humiliation. He chose to end the killing rather than perpetuate it. And in doing so, he showed that even in victory, how you win matters as much as that you win. The shocking part of Grant's response to Lee was not the mercy itself, but what the mercy represented. The belief that the country could be made whole again, that former enemies could become fellow citizens, that the work of reunion could begin even before the smoke cleared from the battlefield. It was naive. It was idealistic. It was imperfect and incomplete and ultimately insufficient to prevent the rise of Jim Crow. But it was also better than hanging Lee and his officers, better than marching Confederate soldiers through the streets in chains, better than extending the war another year through guerrilla conflict. Grant's mercy was the necessary first step toward peace, even if much harder steps would be needed to achieve justice. In the end, that room in Appomattox Courthouse represents both the best and the limits of American reconciliation. The recognition that mercy is necessary but never sufficient, that healing must be accompanied by justice, and that the work of making a more perfect union is never finished but must be pursued generation after generation, even when the cost is high and the outcome uncertain. Grant and Lee shook hands, and the bloodiest war in American history took its first step toward ending, not with triumph or tragedy, but with the complicated hope that something better might come from the ashes.